Alright guys, hi, happy Friday. So we're creating a different kind of assignment today. It's not going to be content based, it's going to be more on the components of the long essay question and giving you guys a little bit of time to practice independently on creating a thesis statement and what the context or the contextualization looks like for the long essay question. And then the rationale for that is because, like I mentioned, we're actually probably going to find out more information today from AP College Board. Based on the time frame that you're going to be given for the AP exam, which is roughly about 45 minutes, I'm assuming that it's going to be either a long essay question or a short answer question. And so all week we kind of been practicing with the short answer questions as far as your exit tickets go. And so today we're going to focus a little bit more on the long essay portion. So the beginning half is just going to be kind of a review. Here you have the LEQ rubric. It's the same rubric that you guys have seen all year round. The maximum number of points you can earn on a LEQ or long essay question is 6 points. So you automatically earn 1 point if you have a thesis that responds to the prompt with a defensible claim. So that means you have to create some kind of argument or some kind of statement that gives us an original thought, and you're making an assertion about something. So you're trying to prove a point, essentially. And then you have the rest of the essay to pretty much try and use the evidence to support that thesis, but the point is that your thesis is going to be located more than likely somewhere in your introduction. If you notice where it says decision rules, it says it's located in one place, either in the introduction or the conclusion. My suggestion to you is to leave it in the introduction. As an AP reader, they might get frustrated if they finally get to the point of your paper at the end of your paper, and so they'd rather make it easier for them and they get to it really, really quickly. The contextualization is the next piece. That part also should be in the introduction. My suggestion to you has always been all year is to do the context first and then the thesis, so both of those components belong in your introduction. The contextualization is the background. If you look at what it again says, it's that it describes the broader historical context relevant to the prompt. So essentially, you're talking about the who, what, when, where, and why. You're very specific. You give names. You mention geographical locations. You talk about empires. You talk about people. You talk about trade. But more importantly, you're as specific as possible. And it's kind of like a mini space for you to do word vomit. You put as much information as you can to let them know that you have an idea or a concept of what information you're going to be talking about. So those are probably two of the easiest points that you can get in terms of creating an LEQ. Then we get to the evidence. We're going to see more specific examples of what that actually looks like. I'm going to break it down for you using a sample prompt, so I'm not going to go super into detail right now, but know that for the evidence, you can earn either 1 point or 2 points. 1 point is pretty much if you simply just identify the evidence, so if you just throw something out there. The 2 points is where it says that it supports an argument in response to the prompt. So basically it is something that helps validate your thesis, but you also go into detail and you explain. And that's not something new. You guys have been doing that all year, essentially, when you write an SAQ, because part of the SAQ is the explanation part, and that's the very, very last part. So if you follow the steps of kind of like what an SAQ looks like, you should be able to reach that 2 point mark if you do the format the right way. The very, very last one is probably the more challenging one, the more difficult one, because it is the analysis and the reasoning point. You can earn 1 point if you simply just use historical reasoning. That's if you try and do a comparison, if you talk about causation, or if you talk about CCOT, which means continuity and change over time. And so simply talking about it in reference to the argument that you're making. The 2.1 is the most difficult one. It's the one that we really hadn't gotten to, so I'm a little bit worried about this one. It's a complexity point, and it's a complexity point because it's very complex to try and achieve it and to make sure you do it efficiently all the way throughout your whole entire essay. The complexity point is when you talk about a nuance of an issue by analyzing multiple variables. So that's kind of like when you look at things from different points of view. And you might look at something from, a positive or a negative side, or a side that is for one empire versus a side that would be against an opposing empire, but you take multiple perspectives on that specific argument that you're making. It says explaining both a similarity and a difference, explaining both a continuity and a change, or explaining multiple causes and effects of a certain situation, or very, very last one is that you're able to make connections across time periods. So if it references something from, Unit 1, then it all of a sudden clicks to you and it ties something all the way into Unit 5. If you can make those connections across those time periods, that's a complexity point. So we'll look at what that looks like a little bit further in the essay. So breaking it down, we're going to pretend that this is our sample prompt. In the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, the rise of large-scale empires led to increasing regional and trans-regional trade. So it's always going to start off with kind of like an explanation or a lead-in to give you an idea about what it is going to be talking about. Then it says, develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the rise of one or more empires contributed to an increase in trade in this time period. That second part is the actual prompt. That's the actual assignment. The first part is just kind of giving you a background, an idea about what you should be writing about. The second part is the task. So in this case, your task would be to evaluate how one or more empires contributed to an increase in trade during that specific time period. So let's look at what this person wrote. We're going to look at a sample right now. So in this case, the sample thesis, it would earn 1 point if the thesis is a historically defensible claim about the extent to which the rise of one or more empires contribute to the increase in trade from the period, again, 600 BC to 600 CE. I know that sounds redundant because I pretty much just read it on the last slide. But it says that it's required, or not required, to encompass the entire time period, but must identify a relevant development or developments in that period. So some examples. There's 2 examples there. The first one says, in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, rising empires encouraged an increase in trade both within and across world regions in a variety of ways, such as by providing peace and security, developing roads and markets, and issuing currencies. The reason that AP College Board gave this one a point, as far as it goes in terms of thesis statements, is that it says that it responds to the prompt with an evaluative claim that establishes a line of reasoning. That is a fancy way of basically saying they had 3 defensible claims. The first one says that trade was able to provide peace and security. 2, they were able to develop roads and markets. And 3, issuing currencies, which is money. So this person used the 3-point thesis statement system. The second one says, empires in this period increased trade by providing security across their territories. Okay. If you notice, this one says, responds to the prompt with a minimally acceptable response. So the idea that this person only has one specific type of example is going to be pretty challenging as far as the rest of the essay goes, because they're going to have to either include 3 really strong pieces of evidence for that one specific point, or they may not get the evidence points if they don't have enough adequate evidence. They might earn the thesis point because they have a defensible claim, but they're not going to earn all the points. And remember, our job for as far as AP writing goes is to try and earn as many points as possible. We want to earn the points, work smarter, not harder. The contextualization piece. Now, this one I kind of have a little bit of iffiness about. It says, to earn this point, you must accurately describe the context relevant to the rise or one or more of the empires and increasing trade during this period or this time period. This person's context is really, really, really short. My advice to you all year, whenever you guys were writing your essays, was more context, more context, more context. And the reason that I do that is because sometimes, since it is the very first part that you guys write, it tends to be the part that you, and not just like one person, it tends to be across a trend, people start to ramble. And you don't always get to a specific point really, really fast. It's very, very hard to be concise, be specific right away off the bat unless you do a lot of planning. And it's really hard to do a lot of planning for these essays because you're super limited on time. So in this case, this person wrote, in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, the rulers of many empires created more complex governments, raised larger armies, and some empires used new religions developing in this period to bolster their power. I personally would not have given you guys this point because notice that this person just says empires, governments, armies, religions. Those are semi-specific words. They don't go into detail. You don't mention anything geographic-wise. You don't mention which empires. You don't mention any kinds of types of exact governments. Is it a monarchy? Is it a democracy? Is it a republic? Is it a theocracy? What about these larger armies? Did they conquer territories? Were they successful? Were they disciplined? And then new religions, what kinds of religions? So this is very, very vague, and if you write something like this, you are really taking a chance. So my advice to you was to follow kind of like, again, the who, what, when, where, why. Or think about it if you were trying to tell a kid, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old who has no idea about what they're learning about or what they are reading about. How would you explain it to them in terms that they could be able to understand where you're going to go in your essay? Okay, so the evidence. If you're trying to only earn 1 point, this is just going to be simply identifying. So kind of like what you do when you write an SAQ and you just answer the prompt. Identify is going to be really short, really to the point. And one thing that I do want to mention is that in order for you to still earn 1 point, you have to mention at least 2 specific examples. So you can't just mention 1 example, you have to mention 2, and that would earn you 1 point. So in this case, they talked about the Persians minting coins. So that's specific. It talks about currency, and so that's some type of evidence. They mentioned the Persians, they're an empire, and they did mint coins. We talked about the Persian derrick under Darius that was created. Then it mentions, number 2, the network of paved roads in the Roman Empire helped increase trade in the empire. Road making in the Roman Empire was super important. It's actually how Christianity spread, or helped facilitate the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, because the disciples, went traveling, thousands of miles along this road. But it also helped increase trade because it allowed people to be interconnected with each other. So that's a valid point. The last one says the Qin and the Han dynasties in China helped expand trade by standardizing weights and measures and appointing market inspectors. That also has to deal with currency, because they needed to make sure that if you are exchanging silver or gold or any other kind of valuable, that it has the same weight and measures as others, because then you're going to be shortchanging somebody, or you yourself are going to be shortchanged. And so you want to create a standardized system so that everything else is standard and measured the same way and nobody's losing out on money. So all of those 3 are valid evidence points. Some non-examples. The reason why I wanted to include this is because a lot of us do this, and it's not that we mean to, it's that we think that we are doing an okay job of just mentioning something. So in this case, the person put, the paving of trade roads led to growth of trading practices. Okay, well, we know empires did have roads. That's a point. But it doesn't earn the point because it doesn't mention which empires. So again, be more specific, as focused as you can. The other one says, during the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, rising imperial states contributed to the growth of both regional and trans-regional trade as people exchanged more goods. Lots of fancy words in that statement, and a lot of you guys tend to do this. You get really flowery with your descriptions. The thing with that is you didn't really actually tell me anything. You mentioned regional trade, you mentioned trans-regional trade, and you mentioned goods. Where and what? None of those points are specifically addressed, and therefore this person doesn't earn the points for evidence because it's not specific. Okay, this one is the one that's a little bit more challenging, because in this case, your evidence would also have to support an argument. So the evidence here says that the royal road in Persia, or in the Persian Empire, shortened travel times and stimulated trade between the capital and the provinces. Why is that one different than the other one? In this case, you have, again, the specific mention of the royal road, but you're mentioning what the road does, what purpose the road serves. So your answer is a little bit more elaborate. It's not just mentioning that the Persians had a road, or that there was a creation of a road that helped trade, but it shortened travel times, and it stimulated trade between the capital and the provinces, which happens to be at the time Persepolis. Number 2 says the Hellenistic empires greatly expanded trade in the Eastern Mediterranean because of common language and culture. So in this case, again, you're talking about, yes, the expansion of trade, but you're talking about how it adds or how it helps develop a common language and a common culture between Hellenistic or Greek cultures around the Mediterranean at this time. So again, more elaborate, more descriptive, you're supporting an argument. What is your argument? It adds to language, it adds to culture. The third one says the Han Dynasty used the Silk Road to export luxury goods to distant locations. Okay, so they didn't just use the Silk Road. What did they transport? They transported luxury goods. And for the Han Dynasty, this would have been things like porcelain and probably silk. Then lastly, the Roman Empire developed a system of state-sponsored purchases of grain from Egypt, and it should be in 600 BCE to 600 CE. That was important too, because Egypt was a major contributor to the grain production, and that is where pretty much the Roman Empire got a lot of its food. And so the idea is that creating this state system that was sponsored, the Roman government took control of this, because at the time Egypt was a province of Rome. Egypt was under the control of Rome. And so, again, you're adding more and creating more to the evidence, to the evaluation. Okay, do we get to the final one? So historical reasoning, you get 1 point if you do this. What does historical reasoning mean? You use what you know about the context, about the background, about your evidence to pretty much explain why this is important. So these 3 examples here say, explain how imperial expansion or consolidation contributed to the geographic expansion of trade networks. So how did these big empires, whether they expanded or got smaller, consolidated, contribute to geographic expansion? How did these trade networks grow over time? How did the empires help contribute to that? Number 2 says to explain how imperial expansion or consolidation led to growing demand for trade goods. This has more to do with the idea that some empires had more than others, or some had luxury goods and the other ones didn't, or they wanted something that the other one had. Take, for example, Greece. They weren't really great when it came to agriculture, so they had to import a lot of their agricultural stuff to their people because they never really had a surplus. And so you'd have to go into detail explaining that. And then the last one, 3, explain how imperial expansion or consolidation led to the drawing of new peoples into commercial networks. This is going to be more about the people, the merchants, the traders who were operating along these places. And you could even go into detail expanding on this idea of religion, because as we talked about, a lot of these religions expanded across the trade networks, Buddhism, Christianity, and even the Jewish diasporic communities, because they traveled in these groups and usually along trade networks, spreading the faith, spreading the religion. Okay. The complexity point. This one is the difficult one, the most intensive one. So in this case, the complexity point is where a person would have to really explain multiple variables and considerations, talking about different perspectives or different evidence. So if you were going to talk about, commercial city-states like Phoenicia or Greece, you would have to give a viewpoint from Phoenicia or the Phoenician Empire and from Greece. You were going to have to talk about merchants from Sogdians or from the Sogdian territories or the diasporic Jews. You cannot just limit your evidence to a one-sided argument. It would have to explain two-sided arguments. That's why it's called multiple variables, because you're looking at things from different viewpoints or different standpoints. The second one is going to be that you demonstrate an awareness of historical complexity. So you would have to construct an argument about the rise of networks or the rise of trade in these networks. So for example, Alexander, we talked about him a little bit. The fact that Alexander's conquest led to an economic and commercial decline of the core Persian territories. When he takes over the territories from Persia initially, he replaces them with Grecian or Macedonian types of styles of trading and doing things. And then the long-term effect of that is going to be that you're going to see lots of Greek culture or Hellenistic culture pop up in all different parts of the world. Not just in Greece, but also in all the territories that he conquered as well. Territories even reaching as far as the Middle East or even towards Egypt. And so that is important because you understand that it's a complex issue. His ideas, his belief translated to different cultures and different places because of the fact that he had conquered so many territories under his belt. Lastly is going to be whether or not you can make relevant or insightful connections across time and space. So you're going to have to explain maybe possibly how the rise of empires in Eurasia would eventually contribute to the increased trade in the so-called First Silk Roads period. That is because during this time, initially, China pretty much had a monopoly on silk, and they would continue that legacy even onto these secondary or Silk Road periods that went on and continued later. Because it wasn't until much, much later that Europeans were able to figure out the process on how to make silk, and then other cultures were able to then take it over after that. But you talk about the continuity of the idea that because of the initial, I guess, monopoly or control of the silk trade in Asia, that it would carry over all the way across to different time periods, to different eras, to different regions, and stress the importance of that. So this picture is actually really bad, and I apologize for that, but what I will tell you guys is that I actually uploaded this entire PowerPoint as well as the sample from the AP College Board for you guys to see. So I'm not going to try and read it, and I really strongly apologize. I wish I had chosen a clearer picture. But this person, and it's the very first one that you're going to read, the very first essay you're going to read is part of your assignment, so you do have to read it. This person was awarded both points. They were awarded points for the thesis, and they were awarded points for the context. And so in terms of physical size on the paper, it's about a half the page, or almost 3/4 of the page that you were given. So those of you guys who write introductions that are 2 to 3 sentences, that's not going to fly. It needs to be elaborate. It needs to be descriptive. Your context itself needs to be about 4 to 5 sentences, and then your thesis can be anywhere between 1 and 2 sentences. So at minimum, your introduction should probably be about 6 to 8 sentences, I would say max. So about half or 3/4 of the page. Sample 2 only earns the point for context. It did not earn a thesis point. And so they did include some very specific details. Again, I apologize for the clarity of the picture, but just from looking at this one in general, you can see some specific names that they mentioned. They mentioned the Qin dynasty, they mentioned China, they mentioned legitimacy, they mentioned the Emperor Ashoka. And so they throw names out there. They mentioned the Roman Empire, they mentioned Han and Gupta. The idea is like I said, it's kind of like word vomit. You're trying to impress them immediately off the page with how much information you can remember and you can recall right off the bat. So if you're having trouble seeing these, I apologize, but they are already uploaded on Google Classroom, so you can look at them and watch them more in detail and read them a little bit better for clarity. Your job is going to be to create a context and a thesis by itself. Let me make this super clear, because I know you guys are going to email me or ask me. You are not writing a full essay. You are only writing a thesis and a context. So that means at maximum 8 sentences. You're not answering the same question either. So you have a whole entire slide video presentation over religion. And so the one that I chose for you guys has to do with the same time period, but it has to do with a little bit different religions, or different topics, excuse me. So it says, in the period 600 BCE to 600 CE, different factors led to the emergence and spread of new religions and belief systems such as Buddhism, Confucianism, and Christianity. So it's specific, it tells you which 3. Develop an argument that evaluates how such factors led to the emergence or spread of one or more religions in this time period. So your job is just going to be, again, one more time, create a thesis and a context for how one or more of these religions spread during this time period. Okay, so there's the assignment. Create a separate Word document in Google Classroom and submit it by Monday, this coming Monday, April 6th. Again, remember, you're not writing the whole essay, just the context and the thesis. How many sentences? 8 sentences. Max. No more than that. I hope you guys have a good weekend. It was our first distance learning experience. I'm really glad we kind of survived it. I really, really look forward to seeing you guys. I hope all of you all are doing well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I miss you. Stay safe. And I hope that everything works out for everybody. Bye.